Hi, Olly.
Hi, Olly.
Hey, Olly.
Yo, hi, Olly.
Hey there, Olly. How's it going?
Now, when it comes to language learning apps, we've all got our opinions. We've got a whole bunch of apps on our phone. We know which ones are our favorites. But what about accomplished polyglots? People that learn a lot of languages. Which apps do they use to master their languages? Well, I decided to call up 5 of them and ask. So what are your favorite language learning apps?
For me personally, after 10 years of learning languages, I found what personally works for me, and you have to find what works for you as well. And it's you have to experiment a bit. But in my case, I really particularly like language transfer and Pimsleur. I used to use Pimsleur a lot more, especially when I was a beginner. Nowadays, I use language transfer if it's available. It's basically a really cool course, and it's free, and it takes you through the grammar of a language and in a really natural way. Aside from those 2 apps, there's honestly not too much that that I use regularly. That's one of the reasons why I'm creating my own app, because I just feel like you can do a little bit on this app and a little bit on this app and a little bit on this app, but it'd be nice if everything was in one place. I do use Anki quite a bit because I kind of have to kind of review my words. Aside from that, yeah, it's pretty much the language learning apps I use. Obviously, everyone knows Duolingo, so I won't mention it. It's all right if you use it as a supplement, but not as the only thing that you do.
So I don't use apps. I've recently come into contact with one that I will start using to check, but I've never used an app in my 30-year experience of learning 4 languages. Although, having said that, though, I have discovered that the only app I really like using, there's just one app I like using, and then there's software programs. The one app that I really like using, and I'm going to make a video about it, is Google Lens. Let's suppose that I have this, I'm reading this book in Greek. So I have, for example, say, I just open it, right? And this is still difficult for me, even if I have, let's say, between B1 and B2. So reading is really important to improve your language skills. So what I do to make the incomprehensible comprehensible, I just take the phone, I'm using the phone, so I can't show it right now, and I scan the page. With Google Lens, it's really easy. You can scan a page, and the text, Google Lens transforms the text directly into your target language. You can even listen to it. So I very quickly I read the book in my target language while listening to it in my native language, and I mark all the words very quickly. That's what I like. I don't like apps I don't think that apps provide much content, but I love using apps that make incomprehensible content comprehensible. So that's one thing. That's the only app I use for language learning. And then I use software programs that are really not apps, but you have the app version, Google Translate, DeepL, and all this stuff. So I use a wide combination of these tools in order to understand things quickly to improve my language skills.
So you're using apps to form a bridge between you and the language rather than using apps for the sake of the app itself.
That's exactly right. I use apps as tools to immediately to bridge the gap or to reduce the friction of understanding. When it comes to reading books, even when you have graded readers, and I know you like books because you produce books for language learners. The problem is that even graded readers or books that are created for language learners, sometimes they can pose some problems to a reader, and it can be frustrating. This kind of app removes the frustration of understanding because it doesn't translate single words. It translates the entire text, and it does it really well, especially for some languages, not for all of them.
I love the fact that there's always a new app to discover. So I dig that. I think once a week I'll download an app just to try it out. But my trusty good old faithfuls, I love Pimsleur. I always talk about it. I've done ads for them, but it's real because it's a way for me to passively just I'm driving and I'm talking to myself with this Pimsleur recording. So Pimsleur's great. I have the all access pass so I can practice multiple languages at once. I've tried Michel Thomas. I think they're great as well because you're learning language with someone else who's learning the language. So you can kind of get in someone else's mind as they're learning languages. I like Drops. I'm not a big fan of the gamified learning language apps, to be real, because I feel like they're practicing memorization, and that's never good. That never really keeps the language in your brain, but it is fun to prime your brain. So the Drops, the Duolingos of the world, they make it fun and they get you interested, but then you got to graduate to something that's going to get you speaking.
I've got a lot of favorite that tend to be language specific, which obviously is not a good generic answer. Do you mind if I flip it around and give a slightly different version of that answer? answer.
Go for it.
Which is, I would say, rather than picking a specific app today, I would want to suggest to your viewers, like looking into language-specific free resources that are existing right now, whether it's YouTube channels, podcasts. I've got to a point now with most languages I'm learning where I'm finding there are these amazing YouTube channels, people making, you know, wonderful conversations with transcripts. People have Patreon accounts where for $1 you get hundreds of things, all these great podcasts, bilingual podcasts. Like, I'm just finding that I'm using those more than apps these days. And I think a lot of beginners don't think to look for that. And so I would just suggest spend some time, you know, finding those wonderful gems that are just free on YouTube or your podcast player.
Yeah, that's really interesting, you know, because so many people ask me like, what app should I use? What's the best app? And then so I ask people with experience learning languages like you, and it's like, yeah, I don't really use apps so much.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I used to, but now I'm just so much more flexible, you know, and like I said, with that previous point of learn the same material from lots of different places, there's so many people that have taught the basics of Chinese, for example, in all kinds of different interesting ways, largely for free, right? And so that's a fantastic use of time, in my opinion, versus finding the one best Chinese app.
Don't have like so many apps on my phone, which are like, language related or something, you know, but I used italki for a while, but I was, how do you say it? I was using it more on my computer, and I was just having the calls on my phone, you know. But yeah, and you're still using your phone, of course. So yeah, I think italki is a great way for me, like, because it was so easy to find a native speaker, and it's a great way to hear the language and to get help from someone who really knows where he or she is talking about.
So does that mean you're not a fan of using apps then?
Well, I like the italki app. I think it was great. But for me, it's more like a start. Like, I really need to. It's same as with a book. It's a base. But I'm really like someone, like, I want to speak it on the streets, you know. So whatever I do, if I use an app or if I watch a video or read a book, like, finally I want to use it to talk on the streets or to have video calls with people. So everyone, that's the whole thing. Like, everyone has different goals, and from my perspective, I mostly want to connect to new people. I want to get to know other people, but it's not really my desire to speak a language like fluently, you know. And if you want to speak a language fluently, it can take maybe over years, you know. So that's why I'm always careful with what I'm saying, because like, everyone has different goals, you know. Not everyone has the same desires, you know. And I've chosen to learn multiple languages because I like to connect to more people all over the world. But I sort of accepted that I can,
I like that, man. You're learning, and you want to speak, you want to communicate with people from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's just interesting because lots of people like, you know, they have so many apps that they're using on their phone, but I'm like you, you know, I like to communicate from the beginning. I like to read books. I'm not a fan of apps, so it's interesting to hear that from you as well.
Well, for example, also like, but I'm not sure if you call it an app. Like, I mean, for example, I have like a Russian keyboard on my phone, but it's just more a setting, I think. But it's still like, you're still using an app because I use social media. It still works as an app. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like kind of an app, but not not a traditional language.
But for me, that's working a lot, because like, you're reading what people are saying, you know. And I try to have dictionaries as much as possible. So if someone is using a new word, I try to figure out what it means, or I just ask it in the language, in the target language. So, for example, ¿qué significa esta palabra? O ¿cómo se dice blah, blah, blah? ¿Podrías explicarlo? So I try to keep speaking the language as much as possible. If I don't know something, I just ask it. And it is just like, most native speakers love it if you speak that language. So some don't even speak English. So that's like, they're even happy. So it's like free, learning a language for free, basically. So that's cool, I think.
What I find interesting listening to these guys is that the kind of apps that are being mentioned here are not kind of traditional language learning apps at all. They're things like Pimsleur and Michel Thomas, which are old school audio programs. I mean, I used to listen to the cassette tapes of these programs in the car back when I was first getting started with language learning. And these are the ones that these guys are using. We heard Anki and Duolingo mentioned the kind of gamified type approach, this is not really what these guys are looking for. They're looking more for actual content in the language. And this goes to what Robin was saying, which is that, rather than kind of using an app that tries to add all this kind of gamification and stuff, why not just kind of go to YouTube, and then you can find channels where you've got people actually teaching the basics of the language or providing content in the language. They're kind of suggesting that your time is much better spent actually being there in the company of the language than trying to kind of hack the process somehow with an app. The feeling I have after talking to these guys is the word app can kind of be a bit of a red herring. I mean, certainly for me, I'm used to thinking of an app as being something that's kind of, gamified, an app for the app's sake, something that tries to make language learning quick and easy and bite-sized. But really, I think the best way to think about apps is how there's something that lives on your phone that can provide a bridge between you and the real world of the language. So whether that be, reading a newspaper or using a newspaper app, or listening to music, watching real content in the language on YouTube, or even using an app to connect with native speakers that you can meet or practice with. That for me is the real best function of an app, and how I think we should be thinking about apps. How can we use an app to provide a bridge to the real world rather than trying to reinvent the game of language learning? But I didn't just ask these guys about their favorite apps, I also asked them about their language learning method. And in this video over here, you can hear from all of them about how they actually go about learning a language in the first place. What do they actually do? So you can steal their method.